Three Republicans just did what an entire party spent a year trying to prevent. They forced the U.S. House of Representatives to vote on Donald Trump's tariffs against Canada. And for the first time since this trade war began, Trump's own party is being forced to go on the record for or against his signature economic policy. If this kind of analysis matters to you, subscribe and hit the like button. It helps more than you think. To understand why this vote matters, you need to understand what Republican leadership has been doing for the past 12 months, because this wasn't a debate they lost, it was a debate they refused to have. Since March 2025, Speaker Mike Johnson has used an extraordinary procedural trick to prevent any vote on Trump's tariffs from reaching the House floor. The mechanism was simple but unprecedented. House Republicans passed resolutions declaring that calendar days would not count as calendar days for the purposes of the National Emergencies Act. That's not a metaphor, that's the actual language. They literally redefined time to prevent Congress from exercising its constitutional authority. They did it in March, they did it again in April, and again in September. 3 times in 1 year, the Speaker manipulated the congressional calendar with a single goal: to shield Republican members from having to cast a politically dangerous vote. Not leadership, protection, not governance, avoidance. And when the ban finally expired at the end of January 2026, Johnson tried it again. He quietly inserted new language into a procedural rule that would have blocked any tariff challenges through July. He buried it inside a measure meant to open debate on 3 completely unrelated bills. But this time, it didn't work.
Yeah, so let's talk about who they are first. You have Thomas Massie. He's a Kentucky Republican, long been a thorn in the side of leadership and President Trump. Kevin Kiley, moderate from California. His district has been redrawn. He hasn't said which district he's going to run in. Could be up for a difficult re-election in the midterm elections coming later this year. And then Don Bacon, a moderate from Nebraska, who's actually retiring from Congress. So those 3 are kind of outliers within the party. Each have individual circumstances that might lend them to kind of buck party leadership.
3 Republicans, Thomas Massie, Kevin Kiley, and Don Bacon, crossed the line. They voted with every single Democrat to kill Johnson's procedural shield. The final count, 217 to 214. In a chamber where Republicans hold a razor-thin majority, 3 votes was all it took to break a year of silence. And what makes this significant is not just the number, it's who they are and why they did it. Massie is a constitutional originalist. He framed his vote as defending the Constitution because the taxing power belongs to the House, not the executive. Kiley is a moderate from a redrawn California district, facing a potentially brutal midterm election. And Don Bacon is a moderate from Nebraska who is retiring from Congress entirely, meaning he has nothing left to lose. Bacon's statement was direct and unambiguous. Tariffs, he said, have been a net negative for the economy. They are a significant tax that American consumers, manufacturers, and farmers are paying. Article 1 of the Constitution places authority over taxes and tariffs with Congress for a reason, and for too long, Congress has handed that authority to the executive branch. That's not a complaint. That's a constitutional challenge.
But to your point, Don Bacon, that Republican from Nebraska, sees it as Congress's duty to decide these decisions. He says Article 1 of the Constitution places authority over taxes and tariffs with Congress for a reason, but for too long, we've handed that authority to the executive branch. Time for Congress to reclaim that responsibility.
Now, Speaker Johnson offered his own rationale. He argued that the Supreme Court is about to rule on Trump's tariffs, and Congress should
his desire for the rule to be extended.
And the rationale for this, for just extending this for a little bit longer to July, is to allow the Supreme Court to rule on the pending case that everybody's watching and waiting for. That process has been playing out. I think it's logical to allow that to continue. The president's trade policies have been a great benefit to the country. It's indisputed what it's done. I went through some of the statistics and how that's helped the economy. And I think the sentiment is that we allow a little bit more runway for this to be worked out between the executive branch and the judicial branch.
Let's be precise about what Johnson is actually saying here. He claims the president's trade policies have been a great benefit to the country, and that this is undisputed. That is not accurate. The Yale Budget Lab estimates tariffs cost the median American household $1,400 per year. The Nonpartisan Tax Foundation puts the figure at $1,300 for 2026, up from $1,000 in 2025. American consumers are paying more. American manufacturers are paying more. American farmers are paying more. The only thing that's undisputed is the cost. And the Supreme Court argument is even weaker than it sounds. The court heard oral arguments on November 5th. That was 98 days ago. No ruling. The next possible date is February 20th, but legal analysts suggest it could take until summer. Johnson wasn't waiting for the court. He was hiding behind it. What the House is voting on today is House Joint Resolution 72, introduced by Democrat Gregory Meeks. It's a straightforward measure. It terminates the national emergency that Trump declared on February 1, 2025, the emergency he used to justify tariffs on Canadian goods. The original rate was 25%. Trump raised it to 35% on August 1st. The legal basis? That Canada's failure to address cross-border drug trafficking constituted an unusual and extraordinary threat to U.S. national security. That same legal framework, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, is what Trump used to impose tariffs on Mexico, Brazil, and dozens of other countries. And that's exactly what the Supreme Court is reviewing.
Well, that's the thing here. This is largely a symbolic vote because there's no indication that President Trump is going to sign any bill that comes from Congress over these tariffs. This is his signature economic policy, and he opposes these efforts in Congress.
Yes, this vote is symbolic. Trump will veto any resolution that reaches his desk, and overriding that veto requires a two-thirds majority in both chambers, which doesn't exist. But calling it symbolic misses the point entirely. Because in an election year, every vote is a statement, and what Johnson spent a year preventing is exactly what Democrats wanted, a series of on-the-record votes forcing every Republican to publicly choose between Donald Trump and their own constituents.
Because what is going to happen in an election year, rolling through the summer, you're going to have a series of these difficult votes that Republicans are going to have to make their voices heard. Do they want to side with the president who says this is his signature economic policy? This is going to bring manufacturing back. This is he frames this as the most important thing that he's doing as president. And without these, he would not be able to use the power of the presidency to, in his terms, do all this good that's coming to America. But you have polling that shows that largely Americans don't really believe that. And they think that these tariffs are leading to higher prices, and making things more difficult for them economically. Now each Republican is going to have to put their vote in on whether they side with the president on that or they side with the American people who think these aren't working. That's a very difficult situation for Republicans to have to place their votes on, especially in an election year where you have Democrats making the price of goods and affordability the main issue.
This is the trap that Johnson was trying to avoid. Not one vote, a rolling series of votes on Canada, on Mexico, on Brazil, on the reciprocal tariffs. Each one a public test of loyalty. Each one a campaign ad waiting to happen. And the question now is whether the rebellion stops at 3. Victoria Spartz, the Indiana Republican, was initially part of the resistance. She told reporters Congress needs to stop waiting for the Supreme Court. But when it came time to vote, Johnson persuaded her to fall in line. She backed down. That's her pattern, but others are watching.
I mean, momentum matters, and we saw that happen with the Epstein files. Sometimes, it begins with a trickle, and then you've got a whole faucet of people who are like, well, maybe so.
Yeah, they dip their toes in the water, see how they feel, and then all of a sudden more and more start jumping in when they feel safe. And that's, kind of the situation what you have with Republicans here.
Momentum matters. 3 became enough to break the dam. If more follow, and in a midterm year the pressure only grows, this shifts from symbolism to genuine political crisis for the White House. And there's a parallel track that could accelerate everything. The Supreme Court case, VOS Selections versus Trump, is still pending. The Court of International Trade and the Federal Circuit both ruled that IEEPA does not authorize tariffs. Prediction markets give a 70% probability that the Supreme Court agrees. If that ruling comes down in the next few weeks, the entire landscape changes. Not symbolism, legal force. The administration says it has replacement tariffs ready within 24 hours. Section 122, Section 301, Section 232, alternative legal authorities to reimpose trade barriers. But none of them offer the sweeping unilateral power that IEEPA provided. And every alternative comes with its own procedural requirements, investigations, and time limits. For Canada, this moment is significant, not because a single House vote will end the 35% tariffs, it won't, but because resistance to Trump's trade war is no longer coming from Ottawa or from trading partners abroad. It's coming from inside his own party, from inside his own Congress, and potentially from his own Supreme Court. 3 fronts, 3 sources of pressure, and for the first time in a year, Trump is being forced to defend a policy that his own allies are publicly calling unconstitutional. Canada didn't create this fracture, but it stands to benefit from it. This isn't a country waiting for permission to trade freely. It's a country watching its largest trading partner argue with itself over whether its own president has the legal authority to tax its goods. Trump still holds the veto. He still controls the executive, but he no longer controls the narrative, not in Congress, not in the courts, and increasingly not within his own party. The cracks are no longer hairline, they're structural. If you found this analysis valuable, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to see it. This matters, and it's only getting started.